Hello and welcome to another episode of DataCube's online training. This is episode 6 and today is about data parameters. Hope you're enjoying the series so far. Before we get on to data parameters, we need to be talking about data sources and understanding how to use the advanced editor. So let's get over to Power BI. Okay, so we're back again in our grocery shop Power BI workbook. And we know that we've already been able to connect to a data source, and in this case we've connected to 5 different data sources, which has helped us populate all the tabs and create all the visuals that we've made so far in the workbook. Now we know how to connect to the data source, but what is Power BI actually doing sort of behind the scenes? Well, to be able to understand that, we need to explore a little bit of the data transformation button. So you can access this by, on the top ribbon, use transform data button here. It says use the Power Query editor to connect, prepare and transform data. So this is the place you go to sort of manipulate your data further. So it has a whole host of tools along the top here. Now you can see the 5 data sources with this sort of table icon down the left. If we just ignore these bottom 2 for now, and this is what we're going to be creating later, but I just made a few first. So what we need to make sure we have enabled is this query settings. Now if you go to view, there's a whole host of options that allow you to see how your query editor is sort of populated. So for example, I've got a few text boxes selected here, so for example column quality, so I can see what proportion of my data is populated. There's the white space enabled, monospace, you can change that, column distribution, which creates charts for you to see sort of the column quality a little bit differently, and then the column profile brings up this big area at the bottom. Now the one that we need to make sure enabled, or 2 really, are the 2 on the left in the layout tab. Now one is the query settings, so you'll see that box on the right appear and disappear when I press that, and the other one is the formula bar. Now I need to make sure both of these are enabled for this episode today. So in the query settings, whenever you change something to a data source, it adds a step. So you can see this area here called applied steps. So if we make sure that is the arrow faces down, we can see the steps that I've taken on this data source. Now the first one on any data source will always be source, because that's you bringing it in, so that's how Power BI is bringing it into Power BI. So the first one, as I said, is source, and there is a little cog next to it. So to know which data source you're looking at, it's sort of grayed out on the left. So at the moment I'm looking at grocery email subscribers. So it's a really small data set, just 9 rows. And if I want to know anything about the source, I can click on the settings or the cog on the right, and it will bring up this source box here. Now this shows me the file path that this data set is sitting on. Now we use Google Suite, so this is G Drive. This is just in a shared drive, and I can change that by pressing on browse, and it will open up that directory and go to probably the last place I was at, and show me if there's any options there for me to join. As I mentioned earlier, we have this applied steps area here, and these appear in chronological order. So if I click on the first one, it's going back to when my data was imported. So you can see here column 1 is just called column 1, column 2 is just called column 2, and the first row is actually my headers. So the first thing I did was do something called promoted headers. So if I click on that, it then takes you to that part of the applied steps, and as it's sort of chronological, you can almost see back what you've changed. So how I did that was go to home, and I just press use first row as header, and it just promotes them. You can keep pressing it and it will just keep promoting if you had a load of blank space at the top, for example. And then it looks like I did another thing here, change type, and I can see that in the formula bar that's popped up here, so make that a bit bigger. And all this did was I changed subscriber events, the first one, to type text, and the volume to an integer. So I know that this is text or words, or a combination of words and numbers, and this is a numeric integer field. So what we need to be thinking about now is this source. If we're confronted with the problem that we want to be able to change our source. Now there's three ways of doing this in Power BI. One, using this source here. Two, using the advanced editor, which sits up here. And three, making parameters, which are what these two parts on the queries tab are over here. So you've got your 5 data sources, and these two at the bottom are called parameters. But we'll go through those in turn. Let's start with our first option, changing the source through the applied step source. Click on the cog like we did earlier, press browse, and now I know that I saved this in this file path here. So these are my episodes, episode 3, I know we had some BI material, and here's all my data sources. So we're looking at the moment at, you can see on the formula bar at the top, episode 3, that's where I am, BI, it's moved, number 5, BI material, grocery email subscribers.csv. So if which is this one here, so if I wanted to change that to a different file, then perhaps I could do it as people. So if I open that, it's going to think about it for a second, and then I press OK, and we can see the source has now changed to the people.csv. Now that is not what I want for my grocery email subscribers, but it shows how we can simply change the file using the source tab. And you can see in the formula bar here it's now changed to people. Now the other way of doing that in the source is to manually write it into your formula bar. So I know we need to look in episode 3 and BI material, and we know it's called grocery email subscribers with spaces in. So you could manually write in here grocery email subscribers, make sure you spell it right, press enter, and it's changed back. And my steps have stayed here, so promoted headers, change the type. So that's great. That's not step 1, that's the first way you can easily change your source. So for example, if your CSV got updated, it changed name, or you've stored it in a different location, you can easily just press on the cog, press browse, direct through Windows Explorer, or just manually write it in the formula bar when you click on source here. Now our second option is using the advanced editor. Personally, this is the one I use the least. It's probably the most technical. So if I click on that, I am brought up with this page here. Now you can see there's some sort of code written here, which is in Formula language. It's similar to F#, which I don't personally have any knowledge of at all. But we can decipher some of this. So for example, it says source, and we know that's the file path that it's looking at. It says our grocery email CSV. It's delimiting, so every time it puts a comma, it puts it onto a new row. And then these hash here with the quote marks are the applied steps that we had on the right. So if I move that over, we can see the first one was promoted here, the second was change type. So it's keeping it in that same structure, but it's basically the code that gets written behind the scenes every time we do something with our data. So the first one's for the source. So when we promote the headers, when I press that button saying use first row as headers, this is what it's actually doing to the data set. So it looks at the table, promotes headers, source, promote all scalars equals true. So instead of us having to actually manually write that ourselves, Power BI has created all these buttons for us to be able to do and simplify things like that. But the second way we can be changing our source is to go into the advanced editor and edit this line of code along here, and change it to the source wherever we know. So for example, if we were going to change that back and just put this as, oops, moved over, maybe I'll full screen, and change this to grocery shop. I'll just copy that for later. Grocery shop, and press done. We can see our source has changed, and we've got our old grocery shop data with all the different vegetables. So if I go to the advanced editor, again, I'm going to just change that back. So where it says shop, I copied what was there before, so email subscribers, just pasted it back in. So that's how you can use the advanced editor to change. So that's probably the most sort of technical way. But we're going to use that to help our understanding with our third way of doing this, which is data parameters. Now, data parameters take a bit of time to set up, but once you've set them up, it's basically a way of toggling your data source without ever having to change the source or to change anything in the advanced editor, but by using a sort of drop-down feature. So if you know your data source might change location from one place to another, or maybe sometimes it's going to be looking at a CSV file, and sometimes it's going to be looking at a SQL database, or sometimes you'll be looking at Google Analytics space, then you can preset places that you might want to switch your data around to, and then it allows you to toggle between them easily. So yeah, as I said, initially a bit of startup, bit of setup time, but once you've set them up, then it allows you to swap your data sources in an instant. So this is going to be a little bit more tricky, so hang in there with me. So something I've done already is changed the data source for the funnel data v2. So before it was pointing at a CSV, just like any of these other ones. So if I click on the source, I can see for the funnel data it's looking at CSV, but for the grocery shop you'll see it looks a little different. Now here my contents are looking at this hash, folder name, and a file name, and .csv. Now you may notice that this folder name looks remarkably like this line down here, and file name looks like this. Now these are called data parameters. Now what I need to be doing is talking you through this manage parameters button. So if we click on this up here, you can see I have two parameters here. One is folder name, one is file name. Now you can easily create a new one by clicking new up here, but I'm going to speak to you quickly through the ones I've already made. So the way I've gone about this is I've thought about the structure of our sources. So if I have a look at this funnel data and look at the source, we can see there are sort of two elements to this. One is the folder, and one is the file name, and then we've got the data type at the end. So the way I've gone about that is creating a folder name and a file name separately. So the first one is folder name. So what I've done is created a new one. So I've written here folder name, I've written description, I've ticked that it's required, and I've put the type of this parameter as text, so I can actually manually write in the locations that I want this to be. I've clicked on here list of values, which allows me to put multiple parameters in, and in here I've put the folder name for where this file is sitting. So we can see here, if I copy this out and pop it in a notepad, we can see it's looking at this file location, so shared drives, marketing, online training, episode content, episode 3, BI material. So if we move that away, and that's where that's looking, and then you have to select a default value and a current value. So because I've only got one option, they're both that location we just looked at. Now file name, you can either click on the manage parameters button at the top, or you can click on each of these parameters and select manage. It takes you to the same place. So the file name here, I've chosen that it's just got file name, description is file name. Again, I've chosen text. and listed values. Now this time I've put in a few more options so we can have a little play around. So grocery shop is the actual data source one, and then this sort of people, pop change, pop numbers are other data sets that I've got in that folder. And down here I can set the default value to grocery shop, and the current value that I want it to be right now is also grocery shop. The last thing we need to do is amend our formula bar, or in the advanced editor, to take into account these parameters that we've made. So if we take a look at the final data, we can see it's looking for a CSV document file, contents, it's got the folder, it's got the file name, it's got the CSV. So if I go to grocery shop, I've already amended this source. So we've got the same start, and now it's looking at the folder name and then the file name and .csv. So what this is actually doing, you put a hash in. If I get rid of that, I can show you exactly what it looks like. So hash, and then quotations, and then you can look down here and it's got a folder name, and it's got this little box which tells you that it is the right thing we're looking for, which is type parameter. So I can click on that and it automatically populates that for me. What I've done then is put an and then a backslash, because if we look at this data here, we know the source, it needs a backslash in between this folder name and the file name. So that backslash there is just replicating that one there. So if we go back, source, and then so we've got our folder name, which is being chosen in the parameter, the backslash is being added in, and then the file name, exactly the same concept, so we use the hash, and then I'll do that again so we can see. So we need a hash, open that, file name, I've just pressed tab to make that appear, make sure there's not double quote marks. I put another and here, and I've just manually written in .csv so it knows what file type it is. Because all these are CSVs, it can always be a CSV. Now, so that has worked. If I press enter, we can still see our data set is there, which is the grocery shop. So if I now change this grocery shop to pop change, go back to grocery shop, go to the source, and it's changed it to me to pop name, file name, or maybe I want it to be pop numbers, go back to grocery shop, go to source, and this is now the pop numbers dataset. So if I go to promoted headers or applied steps, you can see that is errored and we don't have that dataset, and that's just because it's been going through the applied steps that I've already created on that grocery shop file. So if I click on source, it works, it picks up pop numbers in that same folder. Go to promoted headers, that takes it up one, so our first row now is the top row. Change type has errored because the column date of the table is not found, and that's because within this table there isn't a column called date. So we know that that's now working, which is really good. So I can actually put that back to grocery shop, and even on the last step, it's all working for us there, which is great. That all may seem like quite a lot of effort, set up these parameters, changing the source, but once you've done it once, you can always copy and paste this over to different source here and have a different parameter set up for that source. Yeah, it may seem like quite a lot of effort, but once you've done it, it's, as you can see when we were just playing around there, it's super easy to toggle with your data sets. And this is really useful when you want to be switching between, if you've got sort of SQL databases set up maybe, you're switching between different servers, databases, schemas, and you need to do that often, then it really makes that easy. If you had a report that you wanted to say to switch between different clients, or you have different internal data, if you're doing your reporting internally, then it's a really easy way to be switching. It's what you really ought to be doing. You have to put in the different database credentials when you initially set those up in the data source settings, but once Power BI knows those credentials and the permissions that you have, you'll just be able to toggle because it will remember those settings, so you'll only have to do that much. So that was something a little bit more challenging today. We've been able to play a little bit around with the query editor, see a bit of the code that runs behind the scenes. But I hope that does make sense. Feel free to post any questions to us, and catch you next week. So next week we're really going to switch things up, and instead of going down the sort of technical route, we're going to something very different, and we're going to do a design session. So I'm going to be speaking about design basics, which is something I more specialise in. So that should be super interesting, super informative. So we'll see you next week. Thank you.